Ceasefire talks could resume this week between Russia and Ukraine as both sides ramp up drone strikes. President Trump gave Russia a 50-day deadline to agree to a ceasefire or face tougher sanctions. Now the Kremlin says Russia's open to peace, but with conditions, including Ukraine renouncing its bid to join NATO. Ukraine and its Western allies have rejected those demands. Let's bring in ABC's Patrick Reevell and ABC News national security and defense analyst Mick Mulroy for more. So, Patrick, what's the latest on the fighting?
Hi, Dan. Yeah, it was a bad night again in Kyiv. We saw once more hundreds of drones and missiles launched by Russia into Ukraine. At least one person was killed and 8 people wounded in Kyiv. A number of strikes hit the city center, which is relatively unusual. One drone struck the entrance of a subway where hundreds of people were sheltering in Kyiv. There was a frightening video there showing dust and smoke filling the platform where people were sheltering. And that just speaks to how it's becoming more and more dangerous for civilians as Russia is increasing the size of these strikes. I think we're seeing Russia most nights now send hundreds of drones. And again, we saw more and more of them getting through as Ukraine's air defenses are strained, Diane.
Mick, the Kremlin's goals for a peace deal include Ukraine withdrawing from the 4 regions Russia annexed in 2022 but never fully captured. They also want Ukraine to renounce the bid to join NATO, accept strict limits on armed forces. Do you see Ukraine agreeing to any of that?
But Diane, I do not see them agreeing to those maximalist positions. Essentially, they want Ukraine to be a non-sovereign state, essentially allowing their security to be dictated by Russia with no ability to form alliances, which they obviously need. So I think it's maximalist. I think they're in many ways they're just trying to keep this ceasefire negotiation talk going. But the only way that's really going to be effective if there's an actual ceasefire during the negotiations. If not, I believe Russia is just going to keep continuing to strike civilian targets in Kyiv. They're going to try to incrementally take up territory in the east. And that is their plan. They have 50 days to do so before there's even consequences. So the only way to change that is to make consequences, which is to get ready and potentially speed up putting sanctions on Russia, potentially even secondary sanctions, excuse me. They can also start releasing some of the frozen assets that Russia has in Western banks. There's over 300 billion, and that could also be substantial and something that Russia would want to see. But right now, it looks like Russia's just going to keep doing what they're doing, potentially increasing, as Patrick said, their attacks, but with no real interest to see any kind of negotiated ceasefire.
Patrick, what needs to happen at this point for ceasefire talks to resume?
Yeah, Dan, I mean, President Zelensky yesterday said that Ukraine would like to hold a new round of talks this week in Istanbul with the Russians. And, we've seen 2 rounds of talks since President Trump came to office. Both of them really didn't produce much, particularly the second one only lasted about an hour and a half. What they did do is achieve large prisoner exchanges, which is very important for the men being held prisoner and their families. And there are negotiations on trying to return the thousands of Ukrainian children that Russia has taken in the course of the war. And President Zelensky said that he wanted to discuss both those issues. He called on Vladimir Putin to meet with him in Istanbul and hold talks. He did that last time. I don't think there's any chance Vladimir Putin will agree to that. I think ultimately what we're seeing right now, though, is that both sides have an interest in showing to President Trump that they are continuing to look for peace. And so both sides are indicating they want to hold talks like this, even though I think neither has a great hope that much will come from it. The Kremlin, a source has told Russian state media that they think it could happen by the end of this week. They said a date has been confirmed, but I think likely we will see another round of talks, most likely this week. But whether anything will come out of them, I think we have grave doubts. And I think the idea that a ceasefire will come from them, I think is extremely, extremely unlikely, Dan.
Mick, earlier this month, President Trump threatened Russia with steep secondary tariffs and announced a pipeline to send American weapons to Ukraine. Is that giving Russia more incentive to negotiate and maybe back down on some of these demands?
Well, certainly, I think that is the intent, and that's a good step. The secondary sanctions predominantly would come from the Sanctioning Russia Act that's currently in the Senate, with over 84 senators signing on to it. What that would do is put a 500% tariff on any country that does trade with Russia, which is India and China. It is a significant step. I don't think that should be underplayed. but it would have a major impact on Russia's ability to fund their war in Ukraine. They are essentially, as Senator McCain used to say, an army with a gas station. So if they cannot sell their energy around the world, particularly to China and India, they will have a very difficult time funding their war efforts. So it could have significant consequences. And of course, Ukraine needs weapons, particularly defensive weapons right now, because we can see all the cruise missiles and drones that are striking civilian populations in Ukraine. That is something that should be happening almost on a regular basis. The offensive weapons, of course, is what they need to actually start taking territory back. So there's multiple things that could happen, and I agree with the premise of your question, Dan. The point of this is to put pressure on Russia.
All right, Patrick Reevell, Mick Mulroy, thank you both.